Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this incredibly important hearing.
Use your mic.
Thank you for holding this hearing, and I thank the witnesses for being here to help us forge a new path forward, a path to a place where black men and women cannot be murdered in the streets with impunity by those sworn to protect them. Mr. Floyd, know that we grieve with you and your family on the loss of your brother, and my heartfelt condolences go out to you and to your entire family. And Ms. Underwood Jacobs, I offer my sincere condolences to you and your family on the loss of your dear brother. Mayor Morial, throughout recent times, we've seen repeated instances where black people, often unarmed, have been killed by a police officer, and if the death results in a use of force investigation, that investigation most often is conducted by the law enforcement agency that employs the officer who used the deadly force. Isn't that correct?
That's traditionally the way it works.
And Professor Butler, we've also witnessed these use of force investigations being overseen by the local district attorney who works hand in hand, day after day, year after year, with the same officer and with the agency that employs the officer who used the deadly force in the case that's under investigation. Isn't that correct? Yes. And Attorney Crump, we've seen time and time again that the investigation becomes long and drawn out, and at some point, months or even years later, the local prosecutor takes that case before a secret grand jury, and out of that grand jury usually comes what's called a no bill, which is a refusal to indict the officer who committed the homicide. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir, Congressman Johnson.
And Professor Butler, because grand jury proceedings are secret, the public never learns exactly what the prosecutor presented to the grand jury. Isn't that correct?
Just like the grand jury proceeding in Staten Island with Eric Garner, who was placed in an illegal chokehold, we have no idea why that grand jury didn't indict that officer for murder.
It becomes just another justified killing of a black person by the police in America. Wouldn't it be fairer if the homicide investigation were undertaken by an independent police agency, Attorney Gupta?
I think it would. It would also give the community members much more faith in their legal system if there was an independent investigator in these kinds of cases.
And Attorney Eiffel, wouldn't it be better for the use of force investigation to be overseen by an independent prosecutor?
Without question.
And Professor Butler, wouldn't it inspire public confidence and trust if the law required transparency in the investigation and that the results of the independent investigation be made available to the citizenry within a reasonable period of time, but not 2 years later, like in the Michael Brown case in Ferguson?
Yes, Congressman, when an officer dishonors her badge by committing a crime, she should receive the same process as any other criminal.
Attorney Eiffel, do you believe that the Justice in Policing Act should require the withholding of federal grant funding to police agencies when the states in which they operate do not require independent deadly force investigations overseen by an independent prosecutor and police agency in police use of force, deadly use of force investigations?
I believe there needs to be an entire overhaul of the funding that goes from the federal government through the Department of Justice to local police departments to ensure that they comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits the federal government from giving money to local programs that engage in discrimination. And one way to ensure that this is not discriminatory is to ensure that there are independent investigations of police killings of unarmed Americans, and particularly unarmed African Americans.
Thank you. Last, Attorney Gupta, many police officers are protected from being questioned in use of force investigations because of so-called cooling off periods mandated under state law like in Minnesota or under labor contracts negotiated by police unions like the Fraternal Order of Police. Cooling off periods prohibit investigators from interviewing an accused officer for a period ranging from, say, 48 hours to sometimes as long as 10 days after an incident. They give police officers a chance to learn the facts uncovered in the investigation and also to create their storylines, get their storylines straight. Cooling off periods for police officers can undermine the integrity of investigations into police misconduct. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Is it time for the federal law to mandate restrictions on cooling off periods, as has been mandated by Department of Justice consent decrees with police departments in Los Angeles, Seattle, New Orleans, Albuquerque, and also Portland?
Yes, the Justice Department specifically put those kinds of provisions into consent decrees because they were a real problem, not only in individual investigations, but frankly undermined the community's faith in the independence and fairness of an investigation with setting up two different sets of rules for people.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr.